teaching him in 2008 when he was in first year. And whenever I see him around campus doing his Master's in Electrical Engineering, of which I'm very proud of him, I feel very old. And I also taught in the first year of lecturing. And I've been at Wits now for almost 6 years. And as Les kindly introduced me, I am finishing my PhD, hoping to do so by the end of the year. And it's also very nice to be here because it's a welcome reprieve from exam marking, which I am getting through at the moment, working through at the moment, fighting through at the moment. I used to teach in the English department at Wits, and I started running critical thinking courses for the Faculty of Engineering and Built Environment. These courses became incredibly successful and popular, and I eventually moved across to the Faculty of Engineering. And so my background is in English literature and in politics, but now I find myself day-to-day teaching engineers for a living. And I teach them basically English literature. So you can imagine that my audience is at many points quite reluctant, quite reticent about being forced to study literary texts in their engineering curriculum. And the point behind this critical thinking course, and the reason why we use the English literature as a mechanism or as a vehicle to impart certain skills, is because it encourages students to read and also to respond to whether in verbal means or written means to the text that we are engaging with, the text under scrutiny. And the idea behind these courses is to encourage lateral thinking, divergent thinking skills, as well as critical argumentation, the developing of a coherent argument. And I think these courses have been extremely successful. I mean, Impendulo is a product of that. I'm singing your praises tonight, but obviously, being in this field, being a lecturer, it requires standing up every day for a couple of hours and talking, and often having an audience that is sometimes a little bit reluctant. How do you win them over? And one could speak ad infinitum about the importance of professional communication. Any industry, all industries, professional communication is of paramount significance. But what are you doing as a speaker? And that was what I wanted to focus my talk around tonight. And to utilize and draw upon some tips that I feel have been useful to me. Don't want to be unnecessarily presumptuous and dictate what I think would be useful to others. But at least what I feel has helped me present and be at least I'd like to think so, an articulate, confident public speaker. And as a public speaker, we have to remember that we are a conduit by which we transmit information and ideas to an audience. And we must make sure that we transmit that message effectively to be an effective conduit or vehicle of information. And when we relate something of importance, we need to make sure that our audience is listening to us. So I was sitting today thinking in my breaks between marking about devising a mnemonic. Right? And I hope you all know what a mnemonic is, even though I was stumbling over pronouncing it at the beginning. A mnemonic, so a memory aid for a couple of things that I think help me as a public speaker. And I've called the 4 P's and the 2 C's. It sounds horribly generic, so bear with me. But I'm sure that there's something in here that I think will be of use. So in the 4 P's, those are namely preparation, practice, passion, and to personalize. And I'll talk about those each individually. And then the 2 C's are confidence and control. So by preparation, I don't just mean preparing your speech. I also mean priming and developing your means of expression. So I am a firm advocate for using dictionaries and thesauruses. So expanding your expression by drawing upon dictionaries, drawing upon thesauruses, and making sure that one is able to advance the way in which you're able to articulate yourself in a variety of different contexts. I also obviously express the importance of reading to my students, and I think why reading is so important, and I'm talking about reading good literature or good journalism, is that it not only expands your vocabulary, but you're also exposed to different forms of syntax, to a different turn of phrase. So you're actually expanding the texture by which you speak, and that you're challenging yourself and going beyond perhaps your habitual forms of expression. And I think that when I prep a lecture or a talk, I always think of constructing it along the lines of a narrative. And that would make sense because I have spent most of my life reading and analyzing literary texts, so I'm very fond of narrative. But what's good about narrative, the idea of storytelling, and I'm not saying to write fiction or to write tall tales, I mean in terms of how one writes coherently. And you're asking yourself a number of questions when you're writing according to narrative. So you're saying, who's my audience? What am I trying to impart? What am I trying to say? What am I trying to get across here? And by asking yourself those questions in terms of purpose, audience, and my message, and thinking of it in terms of the narrative, I think that really helps you. As well as the fact that I think that keywords can become an effective structuring mechanism for your talk. So you prepared notes. You have, perhaps you haven't even prepared notes. But I think that when one can glance down or revert to memory, certain keywords, clusters, which we aggregate and we attach meaning to, that can help us if we're feeling lost in our speech or feeling lost in our preparation. So it becomes an anchoring mechanism to revert to, or consolation perhaps when we're looking at a room full of faces and we start to go blank, is to recall those keywords. And I like that idea of cluster or nugget. So it becomes this sort of thing that things combine or join or grow around. Okay, practice is very obvious, but what I think about practice is that it's not just being at home, practicing your speech or practicing your presentation to a family member, to yourself, in the mirror or in the shower, etc. It's to also practice according to different contexts. Because I did a little tally last week, and within the first semester, I have taught about 65 lectures and coordinated a number of tutorials. And if I think about 65 lectures, every day getting up, going to work, teaching 45 minutes at a stretch, not once did I ever feel nervous. But when Mfundulu invited me tonight, I thought, ooh, a little bit of butterflies. Why is this? Why should I be nervous of speaking to a group of about 10 people when I speak to individuals of 100? And I think context is key. We may become quite accustomed to a particular context, feeling safe in that environment, but we need to challenge ourselves to speak to different groups of people so that we become used to or perhaps familiar with different situations, different environments. Okay, and passion. Passion, I think, is so incredibly important. You need to believe and be excited in what you say, because if you're not excited in what you say, if you don't endorse, if there's no kind of affect behind those words, what you say is empty. And I think that I want to ensure that I have dynamism and energy and enthusiasm in what I say, so that it becomes infectious, so that it infuses the words that I use, so that there is import, that there's richness, that there is significance to them, and that I'm imparting something to my audience, that my students are sitting up and listening, that they are taking note. And in terms of personalizing, one has to become accustomed to one's own voice and what one has to say. And I don't just mean that in a physiological sense, what does your voice sound like? I mean also, what do you have to say? So personalizing what you need to say. So perhaps in industry one day, you are relating a report, and the figures, etc., are very dry, and it's boring. You don't want to lose your audience. So sometimes if you can embellish or embroider it with an anecdote or an illustration, an example, a quote, just so that it enlivens what you're saying. Also on the term of personalizing, make sure that the register, meaning the level of language that you use, perhaps the jargon, the diction, the wording, that you're comfortable with that wording. As much as I'm encouraging expanding one's vocabulary, pushing the frontier of what you're comfortable with in syntax and turn of phrase, etc., one still needs to make sure that one feels comfortable with the language that you're using. Otherwise, it gets ahead of you and you stumble. I mean, it's obvious that one makes mistakes like I did earlier when I couldn't say mnemonic. But you don't want to be stumbling over your words that they feel disingenuous, that it doesn't feel sincere to you, that it's not your words and you're writing something. And so moving on to the 2 C's, confidence. Confidence is an obvious one. And perhaps maybe I shouldn't even make mention of it because it is a cliche in a sense. Of course one needs confidence to be able to speak in public. But what does confidence mean? And I think that to a degree confidence means comfort. So what am I holding here? A fabulous paperclip. And I fidget a lot. Even when I'm sitting watching a film or reading a book, I'm moving all the time. But if you watch someone moving all the time, it's very annoying. It's very discombobulating, perhaps, because you can't focus on what they're doing, or you can't focus on what they're saying, you're focusing on what they're doing all the time. So sometimes I feel as if you can channel that fidgeting, channel that sort of discomfort into just your fingers so that no one can really see what you're doing. Also, sometimes being behind a lectern is quite nice because it hides a multitude of sins, and you can close your paperclip and no one can see it. So breathing as well, I think, is something that gives us perhaps comfort, but also control. So when you pause, you can pause to breathe, obviously. You're also pausing for effect or for emphasis. But breathing at least allows you to take a step back and to take control. Because I speak very fast when I get very excited, but also when I get very nervous. And so I feel that you're on a steam